Plastic evaluation is our core expertise at Gradical. We help medical technology companies choose the right plastic for their application with the technical suitability, regulatory compliance, and improved sustainability. Learn more under www.gradical.ch/plastic-evaluation. Our guest today is Beat Keller. Beat is a regulatory expert and electrical engineer with deep technical knowledge in electronic and electrical devices. He has over 15 years of experience in the medical device field and has been working in several standardization working groups for electrical and electronic devices. Also for the IEC 6061-1, which we are going to discuss in the episode. He recently founded his own consultancy, Swiss Medical Device Consulting GmbH, where he helps medical device companies be compliant. Here is our discussion. Hi, Beat, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lucas. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it is a pleasure again. We had you on in the German version of the podcast, and you were so good that we had to have you back. So you're an expert for the safety of electrical and electronic medical devices. What is electrical safety? What does it deal with, and what is that about?
So in principle, it's about making a device safe for usage for the user and for the patient. So what we don't want to have is electricity, for example, or a fire reaching a patient or a physician. And this is what electrical safety is about. Ensuring that we have the power where we need it inside the device, or maybe for treatment, but not on the housing or any other applied part to the patient.
Okay. So then tell us about what norms there are. I know that you're in a standardization group and also deal with the 6061-1, which is one of the most important, as you told me. And what does that deal with? And are there other norms that are relevant?
So the main electrical safety norm for medical devices is the IEC 60601-1, the general standard for this kind of products. And the 6601-1 family has about 80 standards in the complete family. So we have collateral and particular standards, which then care about EMC, about alarm systems, usability, home care, home health care, or emergency care. And then there are a huge number of standards specifically for one kind of product, such as for MRI system or for a ventilator. And in ventilator, and specifically, there is one for intensive care, one for emergency care, and so on. So there's a huge bandwidth of standards which take care about the safety and the performance of this kind of devices.
Okay. And just for reference, so the 6061-1 is like 500 pages or something?
It's about at that size, including the informative annexes. Yeah, it's quite a huge standard.
Okay, and then you have 80 of these standards. Probably not all 500, but
most are smaller, definitively.
Okay, so quite a jungle. So let's focus on the parts of a medical device that impact our plastic choice, because we're dealing with medical plastics or plastics in medical device. Let's start with what I encounter a lot, namely flammability. How does one determine what flammability rating you need? E.g., when do you really need the V0 rating, and can you get away with lesser flammability ratings?
Yeah. So if you're looking for the flammability rating V0 in the 6601-1, you won't find it. So there are two sections where we have flammability requirements. One is the section 11.3, the fire enclosure. So everything which has to do with the enclosure to keep the fire in there if there would once be a fire. and what we need on insulation in there. And there is another section about hazardous situations in single-fold conditions, where we have requirements for secondary circuits, insulation, and their flammability. But these are the two sections where you can find it. If we go to the fire enclosure first, the fire enclosure itself is a V2 requirement. So if it's transportable and if it's fixed or stationary, then it's a V1. So this is the enclosure where you said it could be, for example, if you have oxygen there, once a fire spread in this enclosure. The insulation of wires and connectors in there need to have then V2. Mm-hmm. What I often see is that, especially for connectors, there are connectors which have V1 or 2, but only as a self-declaration of the manufacturer. The one which has a certification from a third party then directly is a V0. Mm-hmm. And that is what one reason I often see V0 connectors and insulation used, because the ones which are certified are usually then the V0 or the V0 connectors.
Okay. So you said that the wire insulation has to be V2 and connectors also have to be V2. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, good. And the reason why a lot of people see that we want to have in electrical or electronic devices, we want to have V0 is because V2 can be self-declared from the manufacturer, and the V0 is basically then done by the UL.
Well, you can have both from UL. It's not that it must be self-declaration or certified. So you can get a V0 or a V2 from UL or another third party, and you can self-declare it for both.
Okay.
But if you want to certify then your product according to 6601-1, then your testing lab will ask for a certification of the material you're using. And that's when you will go to your supplier and say, hey, I need the flammability certificate for this particular part.
Okay.
And then often they only have the V0 components with an external certification and not the V1 or V2 parts.
Okay, good. So for those of the listeners who don't know what we're talking about the flammability, it is about how good is a polymer in self-extinguishing a flame. So if you start to burn it, how likely is it to just go up in flames, or how likely is it to extinguish the flame from itself? There's also a component of building flaming droplets. So if it builds flaming droplets, that's a no-go. And the best class in flame retardancy is called V0. And then the second best will be V1 and V2. There's also horizontal burning, and that's a whole science in and of itself. And the UL Underwriter laboratories in the US started with these flammability testings, and they, until this day, do this. And that's also known as the yellow card. So that is a just short explanation what this is about. But I do not understand now, where do we really need the V0 then?
You won't find the V0. So you can create in general a medical device with V1 and V2 components. And also in the second, before I said there is another section about flammability of secondary circuit materials, which is then in the single fold condition section 13.1. And there we also have the requirement that the secondary circuit is mounted on V1 material and not a V0.
Okay. So actually for electrical and electronic devices, in at least in medical device, you don't need the V0 materials. Is that correct?
In the general standard, you can find it, correct. Maybe there is one of these 80 other standards for one specific medical device that they say in there we want to have a V0. I don't know all the 80 in my brain, But the ones I know, and I have double checked before the podcast, they all have no requirement of a V0.
Okay, good. So thank you for those insights. If you ever find a place, let me know, and we can also share it with our community. That's a good idea. So to stay on the topic of flame retardancy, those flame retardants, the substances that are added to the polymers in order to make them flame retardant, for some polymers have this property inherently, but usually you have to add some additives. And those additives usually are substances that also have other concerns, such as being SVHC or being carcinogenic or being a environmental hazard. So how do we balance material compliance and flammability, which is a very broad topic, I know, but what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, in the standard, it's often written either it is a polymer with a V whatever classification, or you use metal, which is not really what you're looking for. But this is one possibility, to have at least part of the design where you have power and where you have high energy and the possibility of a fire, that you use a metal sheet to have there more safety in regards of the flammability.
Yeah, but that's a very nice segue. That's a very nice segue, because there are other requirements that your materials have to fulfill, especially also like the dielectric properties, like how insulating is your material, and metals are not very good at insulating.
Exactly. So you will not be able to do it just with one or the other. So it will always be a combination of both. So for the enclosure, for example, if you say I want to have this compartment enclosed for fire, then you can use a metal enclosure for this compartment. But within the compartment, the electrical conductors and the PCBs need to be of polymers because of the insulation function, which is not really good on metal.
Okay. For our listeners, could you explain what PCBs are?
PCBs are the parts where all the chips, so this green usually, parts in a device where all the chips are mounted on and where the power is moving from one chip to another, or the resistors, and also the power is usually on this power circuit boards. PCB stands for power circuit boards.
Okay, thank you very much. So what does the 6061-1 say about dielectrical strength? So how good the material is in resisting the building of a electrical arc through the material?
So there are a lot of requirements, not through the material, but around the material or on the surface. So we have different distances which need to be fulfilled for air clearance and for the distances on a board or on a, let's say, connector. So we have the distances between two conductors, which are dependent on the voltage, on the maximum voltage, and the altitude. Because the higher in the air or on a mountain you are, the lower the density of the air, and accordingly you need additional space between the conductors. But the 6601-1 has not directly requirements for solid materials to avoid that it can go through it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And what other factors are there that would impact our material choice? For example, impact or anything in that regard. You mentioned the mold stress relief test and an impact test. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So there's a complete section in the 6601 about mechanical strengths. And especially if you're then going to home healthcare or emergency healthcare, which is even worse, then you have much higher mechanical strength tests you need to perform. The worst I've ever seen is emergency care devices for helicopters. If you're an engineer and see your device on a shaker on a helicopter performing tests, then your heart will start bleeding. What you can do with a device on such a shaker. So there are a lot of mechanical strength tests, as you said, impact tests, drop tests, rough handling, mold stress, and so on. You need to perform, also depending on how you're using your device. So is it fixedly mounted on the wall of a hospital, or is it a device which is handheld, so you're walking around with it like your cell phone, and probably from time to time it falls out of your fingers down on the floor.
Okay, and you have to perform these tests on final devices, or can you derive them from material properties?
So you do these tests on the final device.
Okay. Credical is the plastic expert in medical technology and supports you in the areas of sustainable plastics and material compliance. Our course, Sustainable Plastics and Medical Technology, will bring your development team up to date with the latest developments in sustainable plastics. In addition, we offer the course Regulatory Aspects of Plastic Selection at the CATS and the SKZ, which provides guidance through the maze of regulations when selecting materials. More under www.credical.ch. And would you simulate it when you're developing a device? Would you simulate that you can pass these tests? Because I imagine those are also expensive and time-taking.
So simulation often is not easy. So you need really experts which are able to do these simulations, and also the software is quite expensive. There are a lot of larger companies, they do such simulations. If you're not able to have these simulations done because of financial reasons, what you could do is, before you go to a test lab, read in the standard what's the height I have to let it fall down, for example, and then test it yourself with a housing where you have some whatever lead or whatever in there to simulate the weight, and then see what happens. So then you can reduce your expenses for testing. If you fail it, you can test it already, let's say, at home in your R&D department with less material.
Okay. So it's very similar to what you would do as a material manufacturer with the UL yellow card. So usually what the material manufacturer does is, we talked before about the flammability rating that is going to be certified by a third party, usually Underwriter Laboratories. And what the material manufacturer would do is, like, they test the flammability at their own facilities, and if it passes, they send samples to the third party. Only if they know they will pass. And this is probably the same strategy here.
Yeah. What often is used, I mean, especially the shakers are quite expensive. Do a fault test at home in your company. That's quite easy to do. If then it's an impact or shaking vibrations, then what often is done is go first to a local university. Local university, they often have such shakers. They have a lot of other equipment, and it is usually much cheaper. And the timing is often much more interesting for pre-testing, because usually you can go quite fast into a university against the sometimes multiple weeks to months lead times for third-party test laboratories.
Mm. So this shake test would be just a platform that vibrates, and then what would you test in there? Would you just like shake it and see if it works, or would you have it turned on, and what would you measure exactly?
You usually you have both. You have vibrations while the device is powered off to simulate the transport and the shipment, and you have the other profile vibrations you perform while the device is running. So you check whether your device is still functioning correctly. And you can imagine if you have a ventilator, for example, where you measure the volume you apply to the patient or supply to the patient, and all the sensors are shaking, it's quite difficult to measure the volume correctly. And this is something you need to check while your device is on the shaker and see whether it still works.
Yeah, and would that then be a requirement, or can you just state, yeah, this device cannot do it under these conditions, so please don't use it on a helicopter?
So it is the intended use definition of your device. So if you have a device which clearly states in the documents you're shipping with that it is a home healthcare device, then it is not intended for a helicopter. If you write in your user manual that it is an emergency care ventilator or whatever device to be used in a helicopter, then you need to perform this test. Mm-hmm. So you specify as the manufacturer where is it used, and then the standard says which tests you have to perform.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the whole testing thing about the final electrical device and the safety testing, that sounds like 500 pages of complicated technical stuff. So how would I, if I am trying to develop a electrical or electronic medical device, how would I go about this? How do I even know what standards to apply?
So one option is you ask someone who knows it. I mean, there are a lot of standard databases from the FDA and so on, from all the regulators, or you can go to the IEC web store and try to find the standards with using the keyword search. And I think finding the standards which may be applicable is something that's not so difficult, just because of the keywords you can use. Then you open the standards and check the scope, whether the scope of the standard really matches what you're doing with your or planning to do with your device. And most of the standardization organizations, they provide the scope of a standard for free in the web store, so you don't need to buy them to read whether it is applicable or not. And then I think the most important thing starts, that is, if you once have figured out which standards you need, that you read them and figure out which requirements do I need to fulfill. Because what I often see is that companies start developing it, have a huge, nice design, and then when the design is already finished, the device is nearly ready to be submitted to a regulatory agency or to a notified body in Europe. Then they go to a third-party lab and say, we need to test for the standards. And then the lab says, well, the distances between two ports or the distances between two conductors of a connector are too narrow. You need to redesign your device. So it is really important that you, at the beginning of the device design phase, start figuring out what are your requirements. What does it need to withstand in regards of mechanical strength? What are the minimum distances I need to fulfill between conductors so that I can choose the right connector, for example, for the power or whatever, not to, in the end, land in a costly and time-consuming redesign.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it really reminds me of, I think you were the one who posted that. Like, I have the device, my development is finished for my device. I just need CE certification now. And when this is the first time they contact you, it's probably a bad sign.
If they have not checked the standards before, then you can be sure you will find something which is not in compliance with the standard. And I mean, a lot of, or most of the electrical medical devices also use software. I can't imagine that there is still a lot of medical devices using electrical power and have no software inside. And if you're ignoring the software standard, you just have no documentation of your software. And then starting to reverse engineer the software because the people already have left your company and create the documentation is time consuming and does not really makes a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, but I mean, software is not like our core topic here. It's like more of like the physical safety that we were discussing, but certainly an interesting aspect. So another question. So this IEC norm, is this harmonized with the regulatory bodies? So if I pass the test, I will also get the CE mark, basically.
So in Europe, we still have some issues with harmonization. So the harmonization process got stuck already first time some years ago. Then when everybody thought, well, the first stock was released, it resumes. There was another reason why it got stuck. And now, some months ago, there was a decision by the European Court in a lawsuit of it's called the Malamud decision, which says that standards which are harmonized must be available for the public in principle, although they recognize that IEC standards are intellectual property of IEC. So this again blocked the harmonization process, and the IEC 6601-1, we have a set annexes, so it is published and ready for the harmonization process, which already started but is not finished. So coming back to your question, we cannot presume, what is the word used in the MDR, conformity with the MDR, but all notified bodies will ask what's about 6601-1 if you don't have it.
So,
and also others like the FDA, they completely recognize the 6601-1 and all the other standards out of this family.
So theoretically, it's not harmonized, but in practice, everybody asks for it.
Yep.
Okay.
And we still hope that, at Senelec that we soon will find a solution that we can resume the listing in the official journal of standards so that we have the presumption of conformity.
Okay, very good, very good. So you work in a standardization group that also deals with 661-1. Tell us about how this standardization group works, how you meet each other, what is discussed, and how this norming process even work.
Yeah. So most standards we're using are international standards, so IEC or ISO. And on both sides, it's quite similar. So you have in the IEC, there is a technical committee 62, which cares about the electrical medical devices, and they write the medical device standards for the 6601 family. When these working groups out of the TC62 or have written a new standard, they are submitted to the mirror committees in all signatory countries of IEC. So to Switzerland, to US, to Canada, to Australia, Germany, Austria, and so on. And in all these countries, there are mirror committees, which then read the standards and provide feedback. This feedback is then again gone back to the IEC level to correct, optimize the standard until we reached the final draft, which goes out again to vote. And then we have an international standard. If we want to have an international standard, all the countries which are member in IEC take this standard over in their national standardization. In Europe, we have an additional layer in between. For IEC, it is Senelec. For ISO, it's CEN, the European standardization bodies. So in Europe, we then have Senelec taking, in this example, the 6601-1 and writing the European forward and this set annexes, as they are called. In the set annex, we describe, again, in a working group, where can we fulfill the MDR, the IVDR, whatever regulation this standard is used for. It's for us, the 6601-1, it is the MDR. And we map the requirements from the 6601-1 with the corresponding MDR requirements. This is then going to a process via harmonized standard consultants from the European Union. And when this process is done, the European EN 6601-1 is published, and Europe should list this standard in the official journal. And from then on, we can presume conformity with this corresponding part of the MDR if we fulfill the standard. And from the EN, then it's the same again as international. All the CEN or CENELEC countries need to adopt it to their national standardization. So Switzerland creates a SN, Germany creates a DIN, and so on.
Sounds very time-taking and slow.
It takes time. So a new version of the 6601-1, which is currently on the way, will take multiple years until it's published and gone through all these different stages.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a very interesting question. So the regulations have the same issue that you just described, that they take a long time to get there. And then after the regulation, the technical standards, which describe how you would actually do such a thing, because regulations usually are written solution free, and a standard prescribes basically a solution to the problem that the regulation poses. And then on the other side, you have very rapid technical improvements in fields such as artificial intelligence, etc., or new materials or stuff like that. So on one hand, we have the technical improvement that is very rapid, and then we have the regulations that try to catch up. And with this slow process, they likely are lagging behind always a little bit. How do we meet this challenge? Or to translate it, could this be a faster process?
So the idea is for this new approach of the European Union, which is not so new anymore. It's already some years old, but the approach is that in the regulation we say, or the European Commission says, what we need on a high flight level, and then refer to standards. So we can then be faster having additional standards, and not all devices or not all standards are 6601-1 having multiple 100 pages. It can go much faster. An example is there's a standard for high flow oxygen therapy devices, which was created during COVID because there was seen that there is no standard and we have a lot of different devices which completely work different. And then IC was asked by one member country to write a standard about this high flow oxygen therapy devices, and this took less than 2 years to be written. So standards can also be written quite fast if needed. And this is a solution which is currently used also here in Europe, that the regulation is on a higher flight level. So it does not need to be adopted as fast as the state of the art proceeds. And to catch up, we use the standards.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what they also do is they try to make framework regulations that give you a framework that they then can basically change or tweak according to delegated acts. So they can make exemptions, they can adjust certain quotas, etc., just over delegated acts, which are a lot easier to implement.
Yeah.
So you spent your whole career in electrical and electronic devices and in medical device. What fascinates you about these devices? And basically tell us about why you have this passion. And you could also elaborate on your journey of founding your own consultancy, because I think It's like a year now. You just posted that your consultancy is a year old now. Do you enjoy the podcast? Then subscribe and rate it on your platform. And join the discussion on LinkedIn. Your feedback and comments help us improve the podcast and bring relevant topics to you. Let's form a better world with plastics.
Yeah, correct. So now when we are recording this podcast, it is 2 days ago that I have started 1 year ago with my own company. So what fascinates me in the medical device sector is trying to find options to improve the safety and efficiency of devices for patients. How could we save more patients? How we could make life easier for patients, but not only for patients, but also for the healthcare system. There are also a lot of medical devices which not only help the patient, but also the physicians, the nurses, to make their life easier, because we always get older, and every time we get older we also need more healthcare. We need more nurses taking care of us. And where do we take the people from? And if we can make life easier for the healthcare staff with modern medical devices, it's also for our benefit. And this is something which fascinates me, how to make the life better for our patients and the healthcare providers.
Cool. So tell us about how and why you decided to found your own company.
Well, it was something that I already had going around in my head since a long time. It would be nice to once have your own company and try to get something created on your own. And this was then a little bit more than a year ago when I said or decided now it's time to try it out and get something started on your own, and not make or sit into a company which is already there and someone else is keeping running. Now keep your own consultancy running.
Okay, so it was about creating your own path, basically.
Yeah, and having a new challenge.
Yeah,
I like challenges.
It's certainly challenging. Let's talk about the challenges. What challenges did you face?
I mean, there are a lot of regulatory and quality consultancies out there. So the world was not waiting for one more. And so for me, in the first year, the highest challenge was to spread the name of my company, spread that I'm now on the market with all the other competitors, that other people and companies know they could also ask Beat instead of someone else. And now, after a year, I can see that it's more and more people knowing, and I don't have to call all the time other companies. I get sometimes inbound calls or emails, which shows that it looks like I'm on the right way.
Yeah. So what I would say, yes, there are a lot of regulatory consultants out there, but like the variety in quality is also not to be underestimated. So there are good ones and bad ones, and God knows there need to be more good ones.
I mean, one advantage I have, this is what you just said before, is that I'm also working in the standardization working groups on European level, Swiss level, and international IEC level. So I have some early knowledge about what's coming up, which can also be interesting for my clients. And then, I try to provide my customers and clients with pragmatic solutions to make also their life easier, not only the life of the healthcare providers, but also of the manufacturers.
Okay. So tell our listeners about the services that you offer.
So I'm supporting the complete life cycle. The main focus is definitively on the design and development part, where it is about what we talked before, how to apply standards, which standards need to be applied, and how do I get as fast as possible the reports I need to get it on market via a notified body in Europe, self-declaration for low-risk devices, or in other countries like the US, how to get an FDA approval or clearance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you specialize in electric and electronic devices?
This is definitively where I'm coming from and have the most knowledge in.
Okay. So thank you very much. Let's come to the last question then. What advice would you like to give to our listeners in the area of safety of electrical and electronic devices, medical devices?
So whether it is electrical or not, whether it's medical or IVD, I think the most important thing I always tell people and startups is don't ignore at the beginning the regulatory and the standards. If you ignore it at the beginning, then it will be quite costly and time consuming at the end when you need to redesign or rework your documentation at the end because you get non-compliances from a test lab or a notified body. If you start early, you can do it while you're developing your device. You have the knowledge fresh in your mind, write it down, and you can ensure that the device design meets the requirements of the standards. And once you say, I finished the design and the development, you can go to certification and then on the market.
Okay, thank you very much. So I probably lied to you because I just there was just a question that came to my mind. How would you balance between lean development, so getting the device fast to the customer in order to gain feedback on usability, on even the patient and user benefit, and having all the regulatory requirements set? Because what people usually do is like one or the other. And how do you integrate this? So one guy would go ahead and like search for standards and study them for half a year before even getting his foot out the door and even talking to a customer. And the other guys, they just like go ahead, build a great device, but like ignore the regulatory completely. How do you balance that?
I mean, most standards, especially the process standards, they don't tell you how you have to do it. They tell you what you need to do, but not how. And there are often a lot of different possibilities to include these process steps in your design and development process to get that working together. You just said, as an example, usability, and you can go to your colleagues, to a physician, wherever, asking for a feedback. Include that feedback in your design, go back to them and ask whether it's better or not, and then maybe you do one or two more rounds of improvement. And then in the end, you detect that you need some usability tests. Or when you go already in the development phase to a end user, write it down. So you anyway ask a physician or a potential user of a device what he needs. So why just asking him and not documenting it? So a lot of things you anyway do, which the standards ask you to do, but you just often don't write it down what you have done.
Mm.
And there you have a huge possibility to improve your timeline when doing it correctly, documented at the first time, and don't do everything 2, 3, 4, 5 times.
Yeah. Okay. So that's also a great insight for our listeners. If you do something, just write it down. If it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Unfortunately, that's the way medical device is working. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. So any last words from you?
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was an interesting discussion, and I hope it helps your listeners bringing their devices on market.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was Beat Keller from Swiss Medical Device Consulting. And until the next time. Still looking for more in regards to plastics and medical technology? Visit our website www.gradical.ch and inform yourself on the services of Gradical. You can also check out our market report on medical grade plastics on www.medicalgradeplastics.de. Or you attend a training regarding material compliance at CATS or at SKZ. And of course, don't forget to rate and subscribe our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Let's form a better world with plastics.